Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. In each episode, we invite guests to have honest conversations about their mental health journeys with the goal of destigmatizing mental health within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Due to the nature of the podcast, we'll be discussing a variety of mental health topics and possibly triggering experiences. While we and the majority of our guests are not trained professionals, we encourage you to practice self-care while listening and seek professional guidance if you or a loved one is in need of support. With that said, let's start the episode.
Hi, my name is Mariko Lochridge, and I would describe my mental health journey as a magic 8-ball.
Hello, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. I am your host, Matthew Yonemura. Welcome again to the podcast. This is another recording that we did on the same day as our episode with Philip. I hope you were able to listen to the whole episode and you'll listen to this one. I'm doing my best with the sound editing, but for some reason, I just couldn't get the software to work for me. But I hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you did, and even if you didn't, I know you will enjoy this one. Today's guest is really special. I've gotten to know her through Uprisers. I've gotten to know her through all her work in Little Tokyo and at Little Tokyo Service Center. It's funny, we worked together at LTSC, but I don't think I really got to know her until I started collaborating with Uprisers for Family Drive and at Complex Con. So pretty interesting the way that these relationships are built, but I'm really glad that I've gotten to know this person better and to know their work at LTSC. And also, I think it's extremely valuable to me right now as we're seeing the way that Little Tokyo is changing and the way we're trying to keep the community together. So without further ado, I am so excited for you to hear the conversation that I had with Mariko Lochridge. Mariko, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You've helped set up other episodes for me through Uprisers, and we roped in Philip because we're recording at his restaurant. But way back when, last year, when you were playing Family Drive, I was really excited to talk to you about your involvement with Little Tokyo and everything that you're juggling at the moment, but I want to get into that later. But I've just been really looking forward to interviewing you. First things first, why do you describe your mental health journey as a magic 8-ball?
I think because I'm a little bit detached from this concept of a mental health journey, but when I think about mental health, I always think of those lines of people outside of Shinjuku Station in Tokyo for the fortune tellers who read your palms. And there'll be a whole long line of people just waiting. And when I started therapy years or decades later, I was like, oh, this is just the same thing as people do when they're waiting to get their fortune read. They just need someone to talk to. Yeah, so sometimes, when my health insurance doesn't cover therapy, I just, use the Magic 8-Ball app and, get some answers from there.
So you mentioned therapy.
Mm-hmm.
When would you say that this journey, you said you felt a little detached of seeing it as a journey, but when would you say that your journey began?
Probably in the last 2 years. I mean, I've been in and out of therapy since my 20s or maybe even earlier than that. But in the last 2 years, I think what they call these, the attachment styles and everything. And I was told, I definitely have an avoidant attachment style, probably because I moved around a lot and all that kind of stuff. And then my most recent partner, I think that's when I was like, oh, I really like this person. And then I realized all my unresolved trauma. So then I started taking therapy a little bit more seriously. So I think that's kind of the catalyst, I think. Because you can be in therapy for years, it doesn't necessarily solve anything, You're just there talking, but if you're not solutions oriented, you're just kind of repeating the same mistakes with your relationships over and over again.
So I guess what would you consider those years of therapy, being in and out, of it not being considered part of your mental health journey? What would you consider that time? What did you view therapy as in that period of time?
Conversations. I mean, one round of therapy I went through, it was literally just because it was going to grant me a stipend I needed for something else. So like sometimes it was, I don't say mandated, because then it makes me sound like I was required to have therapy, which I never was, but I was incentivized to have therapy. And then, you know, at one point it was trendy. You know, I hate to say that, but at one point it was trendy, especially when I moved to LA. Everyone has a therapist here. It's almost like a talking point. Like, it's like, oh, my therapist told me. It's like, oh, I wanna have something my therapist told me to share in this conversation. And then I had like this like ongoing joke that like, I would tell people that like, oh, like I can't afford therapy, so I like to ask my friends what their therapist told them, so that like maybe I can learn from like their therapy that they're paying for. So I guess for me, it was like always like, for me, a little bit difficult to understand why you would have conversations with people. And then my partner, who also had gone through like pretty serious therapy when he was younger, he once said to me, he's like, do you really tell them the truth when you're in therapy, or are you just kind of still working? And that kind of like hit me. I was like, oh, like me people pleasing one more person. So yeah, so I think that's why I kind of think of it as like, maybe I wasn't like actively involved in my own therapy before. It was just something I was doing because I was told to do it or expected to do it, or everyone else was doing it. So I was like, I'll try. It was kind of like yoga. I was like, do I really like yoga? Or am I just doing it because everyone keeps saying it's really good for you? That's how I felt about running. I ran for years. I even did a half marathon. And one day I was like, do I actually like running? And I was like, I don't like running. Why am I running? Because everyone says like running is great and you should jog and everyone should do like a 5K or a half marathon. And then one day I was like, I really don't actually like running. I don't really like working out. Why am I doing it? You know, walking is just as effective in a healthy diet. So yeah, I think it was like when I started seeing like where does therapy actually take place in my self-improvement or my journey, that's when.
Got it.
Yeah.
I think it's on the other end of therapy when you are goals oriented. Mm-hmm. And because you mentioned like not telling the truth to your therapist or, you know, surface level. There's certain times when I've been in therapy and I've been goal oriented and I'm like, I'm not ready to bring this up to my therapist yet because that's a whole other bag that I'm not ready to open. Yeah. And it's like sometimes that like especially when I first started, I'd end a session, I'd be like, I'm exhausted. Mm-hmm. So like sometimes like the goal oriented part, like towards the end I was like getting more just like conversational and like not as like let's tackle each thing. Mm-hmm. So you just kind of made me realize like, oh, I need to just strike that balance of kind of conversational, but also goals oriented, because going full-fledged into the goal oriented was a lot. Yeah.
And I think also like during the pandemic, I got therapy through Little Tokyo Service Center because they were providing stipends up to a certain amount of money. And, but for me, it was like grief counseling, which for me, I think of as different than therapy, where I was learning tools to not only work through my own grief, but also the grief of my clients, which I just needed tools for. So it felt more like training than it did what I thought therapy and think of therapy as today. So probably a lot of the experiences I've had with therapy in the past were more around grief, and also taking care of other people. Like I was like a caregiver at one point, so that was another reason I was in therapy, but it was more like they were providing me tools for how to take care of other people. I don't know if I was necessarily learning how to take care of myself in those sessions.
So you've already expressed like quite a bit of depth in terms of mental health, but it's interesting because like over text when I expressed wanting to interview you for the podcast, like you'd mentioned that like mental health wasn't in your vocabulary growing up even. So how did you come to learn what mental health is and like learn the importance of caring for it?
You know, it's like interesting. So I have an aunt who's a paranoid schizophrenic. So like I'd seen someone who clearly had mental health issues my whole life, but nobody talked about it, right? And it wasn't until like years later when we had the vocabulary and it was more, I don't know, acceptable to talk about those kind of problems in your own home that like people would actually discuss it. And so I remember like my whole childhood, like never quite not knowing what's knowing something's wrong with her, but not just quite. She's not well today. Like those phrases, the euphemisms we use, like, oh, she's affected, or she's not well, or oh, she just can't come out today, or she's gone off to a retreat. Like these different things, euphemisms we use rather than just saying like, oh, this person's not well, they're getting treatment, or this person's not well, so they're seeking like medical help. And so it's interesting, like now when I look back, I'm like, wow, there were so many moments where we could have had really great discussions around mental health, and from everything from just like our environment affects us to actual like medical illnesses, where those conversations could be had, but they weren't. And so I guess there were like tons of opportunities to have that journey start earlier, but it never really did. And so I think it really, really took the popularization of the terms. And to this day, I would say there's still like very tough topics for a lot of people to even say that it exists. But I think the nice thing about growing up, at least in Japan, is there is this like openness to talk about how you don't feel well in your feelings, your environment, because everyone has like, they don't call them therapists, but you have a fortune teller or a family reader or someone that they say they're supposed to give you your fortunes or your future, but really what they're doing is they know your whole family and your whole life, and they're just kind of giving you like a couple suggestions on how you may want to move forward with things without calling it therapy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, kind of the like understanding your aunt and paranoid schizophrenia, right? Mm-hmm. When it came to learning about the range of mental health, was it like hard to come to terms with like there's a range of different terms around mental health, or were you worried that like no matter what it would be like a diagnosed illness, or like was it easy for you to kind of understand like, oh, I could feel depressed, but it's not necessarily all on the same field?
Yeah, I mean, probably I would say till this day, it's still hard for me to feel like it's okay for my emotions to take center in any kind of situation, even in my own life. But I think that's just like, you're constantly taught to serve others or put other people first or center others before yourself, or community is more important than the self. It's tricky. I'm not still sure. I mean, I feel like it's also gone this other direction where there's like so much information, so many terms, right, around mental health that I'm like, okay, is this depression? Is this like, is this, I don't know, narcissism? Is this, because there's some of these terms that are thrown around now. It's kind of hard, like, oh, is it appropriate for me to use this term in this situation or not? Even when I had taken the therapy to support my work, I was very concerned. I was like, man, I'm so tired. I can't work as fast. Like, what's going on? I kind of feel like down. I'm like someone who like always bounces back. Am I depressed? Is this what depression is? And then the therapist was like, no, that's grief. And grief and depression are not the same thing, because everyone goes through grief and it's a life process, whereas depression is not necessarily something that every person will go through. And that's something important to distinguish. And that was really helpful for me to like understand that, like, oh, okay. So deep sadness could also be grief, feeling slow could also be grief. So I think I'm still trying to understand the terms and where they apply and how I'm comfortable using them, but it'll probably be an ongoing journey, because I mean, the education around it is ongoing, right? Yeah. Like 100 years ago, they would, depending also your wealth status. You could be eccentric or you could be crazy. Yeah. So, yeah.
So kind of looping it into, you've mentioned your clients on different occasions, and I want to kind of loop it into Little Tokyo. So how did you first get involved with Little Tokyo as a place and a community?
So I used to be a full-time breaking news journalist, and when I came to LA, I was trying to meet people because I just worked a lot and I traveled a ton. So I joined the Asian American Journalists Association LA chapter, and then I ended up becoming a board member for about 4 years. And one of my titles on the board over those years was like community engagement, something board member, which meant I threw events or professional development opportunities for our members. And one of the venues we used was a place called OPODS, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was in the Brunswick Square building. And that was when I started to spend time actively in the neighborhood and learn about the neighborhood a little bit. And that was my first introduction. And then the person at the time who worked as the I forget her title, community manager maybe, is Kathy Pham. And when she saw the job ad for Little Tokyo Service Center, where I work now, she thought I would be a great fit for it, and then introduced me to Justin Saka, and then I went there for an interview, and then so I didn't actually know that much about the neighborhood or the history or much of anything other than using it as an event space for another community organization, but finding out later on that many communities use it as a community space.
Yeah, totally. I didn't know that you were a journalist or a breaking news journalist. I
work for Reuters Television. I work for AJ Plus. I work for Nikkei. I've reported in like over a dozen countries around the world. I have awards, like another lifetime ago.
That's so fun I'm learning about you through the podcast. That's so fun.
I think that's why storytelling is so important to me, and probably what I bring to this job now, because I didn't bring a business background to it. I mean, I covered global markets, but that's very different.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's fun. With that, kind of seeing it just as a space at first, but now through getting familiarized, but how kind of getting to your work with LTSC now, like how have you seen the community and the space change over time? Yeah,
so like since I'm not from California, my dad's from the East Coast, my mom is from Tokyo, and so I've mostly grown up in Tokyo, but I lived in Buffalo, New York when I was younger, which doesn't have any Japanese, much less Japanese Americans, so I was very unfamiliar with the history and the neighborhood. And my time in the neighborhood has been a very turbulent time because it's basically right before the pandemic until now. When I was a journalist in Asia, I mostly covered natural disasters because I was in Japan during the earthquake and tsunami, and then one of the monsoons that hit the Philippines, and lots of natural disasters. And when I came to the U.S., I was covering a lot of shootings. So I'm often a part of people's worst moments, but I usually get to leave it after I have them pour their heart out, and then I dip. With Little Tokyo, it's interesting because I've now been working in this neighborhood for 5 years, and I can actually start to see changes over time, right? I think if I had been working here any other time, I wouldn't feel comfortable to talk about what's changed in the neighborhood. But we've had 6 legacy businesses close in less than 3 months, and that's over 300 years of history. So it's been tough to kind of watch that happen in real time and also be doing the work, or supposed to be doing the work around the prevention and preservation of the community. I don't know what's happened exactly, other than saying in a very short period of time, there's been a very high turnover. Yeah, Little Tokyo has definitely changed a lot over the last 5 years and even the last 6 months. I don't know what is next for the neighborhood, but I do think it's exciting that it's potentially one of the first times in recent history where the borders of Little Tokyo are expanding rather than shrinking, because Little Tokyo Service Center has built the Budokan, and they're breaking ground on the First Street North project and the Crocker building. And if they responsibly manage those projects, then there's an opportunity for Little Tokyo to actually grow its borders in the near future, as far as its commitment to the preservation and sustainability of the history of the neighborhood.
I think that's a really good way of putting it, because in all of that, one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you, especially around this time, is because like what we're seeing is businesses close, and that's definitely a very jarring piece. But at the same time, you're making a good point of how it's expanding, and I guess you could argue with Suicidal unfortunately needing to move, but like kind of the unofficial boundary of Little Tokyo is expanding through them, but. I don't know, it's kind of semantics, but like I think that's another good way of looking at things. But moving towards like that positive perspective on things. How do you remain positive through the changes, whether good or bad, but like the ups and downs? How do you stay a level of having a hopeful upward projection of Little Tokyo?
I don't know if I'm positive or not, but I think the way I stay solutions oriented is regularly talking to other like-minded people who are looking for ways to bring people together rather than pushing them out or making them feel unwanted. So you interviewed like Philip Hirose earlier from Aze and now Anzen Hardware. I work with the owners of Suihiro, the owners of Mr. Ramen, Dane over at Bunkudo and his auntie. And I think there's a lot of people who are varied in their views and their backgrounds, but all care very deeply about the neighborhood, and finding that common point to work towards preserving the really important history of the neighborhood and sharing that with other people makes me feel like there is this really strong catalyst for people to want to work together for a neighborhood like Little Tokyo, which is special. I work all over LA County and I've lived all around the world, and there are lots of special neighborhoods, all around the world. But Little Tokyo is definitely, in the top of the list as far as people having a very dedicated investment in the neighborhood, even when they don't live here, which is something I think is pretty unique to Little Tokyo. I have done a lot of work with Suihiro in the last 5 years, and in particular in the last 6 months. And when it became clear to not just them, but also the public that they were going to definitely be leaving their location on First Street and that they were forcibly displaced, that the news and people's reactions was kind of astounding. Like some of the comments, people were crying coming in, and it was like, wow, some people only come here once a year, but it's so important to them that, they're having an emotional reaction to it. I always feel a little bit cold saying this because I got involved with Suihiro because of work. So I don't have the same kind of connection with it, other than the fact that I'm like now I took on this project and now my personality has to see it to the end. So I'm just like, gotta keep going for my own, personality's desire to complete projects to the best of my ability. And I think things like that make me feel hopeful about people on days where I'm like, wow, so many people are so exhausted and don't seem to care. But then you meet so many people who do care so deeply, they kind of make up for the jerks. Yeah.
It's interesting because you said you hate running, but your approach is very marathon-y. It's very much so you got a big cramp in your thigh with the move of Suihiro, but you're fighting through and you're going to get to the finish line still.
Yeah, it's funny. So my dad is an entrepreneur, and he said at the very beginning of his experience, he had a manufacturing company, had over 100 employees, and eventually, unfortunately, went under because of the Lehman shock. But he used to say, had I known at the beginning that being a business owner was a marathon and not a sprint, I may not have gone down that route. And I think that's why I've always chosen things that are felt like sprints, like breaking news and small business. But in the reality, I've tricked myself because it's all a marathon. Yeah. I'm really just trying to figure out how to, support people's legacy living behind, right? That's basically my life's work, whether it's journalism or whether it's working with small businesses. I always define my small businesses as legacy businesses or future legacy businesses. I don't care if they're 1 year old or 100 and 20 years old. For me, they're all legacy businesses. They just might be at different points in their journey.
So before I move forward into more of like the small business or the legacy business questions, could you explain your role within LTSC and like what exactly it is that you do?
Sure. I recently had a title change. My role now is called Small Business Programs Coordinator. Previously, it was Small Business Counselor. When I was hired, the program was designed with two goals. One was to organize educational programming for people interested in starting a business through what they call entrepreneur training programs, which were like 24-hour courses taken over 2-3 months. And the other one was what they call technical assistance. It's like one-on-one. The idea is that people come into your office, they sit at a computer with you, and you help them file for permits. And since I'm bilingual, we offer in-language support. So someone who doesn't understand English really well, I could translate the site for them because most of the sites in LA are not provided in Japanese. And I have actually never done any of those things, especially in recent years. Now I tell people what I really work on, focusing on is consumer education and community engagement. So I design programs and opportunities for people to directly interface with their small businesses in a way that will educate them on the needs of their small businesses and supporting them. And so I have a community engagement program called the Small Biz Hype Squad, which is divided into 4 categories: Little Tokyo Ambassadors, Little Tokyo Explorers, Little Tokyo Boosters, and Little Tokyo Dinner Club. And each program has different aspects of how people can engage with the small businesses that they love on a slightly more deeper level than simply just going and dining them or patronizing them as a customer. So I think that is what, whether or not LTSC agrees or my funders agree, like I think that's my role now, is connecting consumers and small businesses in a way that we can figure out a system of sustainability. Because unfortunately at this point, with inflation and rising costs and just the competition that exists from the internet and organizations like Amazon, it's very hard for small businesses to compete without like deep care. It's just not convenient. I think Philip Hiroshi and I had done a community forum around the future of Onsen hardware. And he was joking that if you're looking for something fast and convenient, do not come to Onsen Hardware. And I joked, if you're looking for someone to remember what you bought your aunt 2 years ago because you have to buy her another gift and you can't remember what you got her last time, then yes, a small business is a great place. If you're looking to get in and out or have it delivered in a timely manner, then a small business in our neighborhood is probably not the right location. Because having conversations is more important than closing a sale.
So I was talking to Philip about this. These episodes are coming out on different days, but we're in the same location and it's kind of around similar topics. But, how do you balance the small business factor of capitalism with the human aspect of being a human, Like, how do you, as, when you went from consultant to now program coordinator and all the different roles that you've had throughout all, like, how do you strike that balance or how do you encourage that balance?
Yeah. So, I think this is whether you're a corporation or a nonprofit or small business. At the end of the day, there are certain areas where efficiency and strong operations can really help to improve sales, to turn tables, to, make sure that the money is still being made and not being lost in the places doesn't need to be lost, right? And I think that's where, consulting is really important, and having someone who kind of points out like, hey, if you just do this, or if you were to open at this time rather than this time, like you could, actually make another X amount of money every day, which would increase your revenue exponentially over a year to this amount. And so And this is something that even like corporations, they think about all the time, you know. I mean, we call it a bottom line, but really what it is efficiency. And a small business can also have that. I think right now what I'm really exploring is collective resources. And so we saw this in the pandemic a little bit, where you'd have a couple different businesses. They would purchase, say, like PPE or takeout boxes together because the cost per unit goes down when you purchase in bulk, right? Marketing services, same thing. Like sometimes if, you know, someone knows maybe they can't just work for one small business, but 2 or 3 that kind of pay in together collectively, or all like say, hey, we're all going to hire you so that you don't need to have a full-time job anymore because now you have 3 or 4 clients. Like that is something that I see as a way where we can still have a small business economy that doesn't run on volunteerism.
Wow. You know what you're doing. I didn't even think about, yeah,
I know people are so surprised when they're like, oh, you're the person who like helps make like fun social media posts. I'm like, well, I actually do look at analytics. Right. Like I do pay attention to information. Like, I mean, there are ways that you can maximize or optimize, like when you post something or how you have a discussion or even the language you use, right? At the end of the day, people patronize small businesses because they want an experience. I'll teach some small business owners. I was like, they left their house. They came to the neighborhood. They're in your store. Like they've already done 70% of the work. Like they're here to buy something and support. If they just wanted to make a purchase for convenience for a birthday party or whatever it was, they would go onto the internet and they would shop at big box and get the job done. And that's what we call the chore economy. Like anything that's a chore, like, you know, buying the gift for the relative that you don't really like, but you have to go to their event, and so you just like order online because you're not going to put thought into it, and you don't want to spend extra time to go look for it, or the toilet paper that has to have like the weekly or the monthly order coming in, so you don't have to stop at the store. All those things that, you know, back in the day would be the thing that like, I'm on my way home. Is there anything I can pick up at the store? Like we call it the chore economy. In Little Tokyo, we have what we call cherished spaces, which are small businesses that have nostalgic memories, or those, what do they call it in that movie? Those core memories that you just can't ever let go of because something significant happened to you in that space, or because of who you were within that space, that is foundational to your personality and your character. And cherished spaces, you cannot purchase that kind of influence over your consumer. That just takes years and years of thoughtful customer engagement because you care about the people walking through your doors, or you care about sharing a product. I don't want to even call it product. You care about sharing the results of your labor to others. And the labor is usually a result of something from your culture or your life that you share through food or an item or product. And I think that's why it's not impossible for small businesses to continue to exist in a capitalistic society, because most people don't want to live within the so-called rules of a capitalistic society. Nobody really likes being hyper efficient, even though like you could optimize everything, but then, you know, where's the experience in that?
I hope it wasn't like, oh, I'm surprised that Mariko knows these things. It wasn't like, oh, it's just like, there's so much, I think, that goes into your work that does go hidden or unnoticed, which is why, like, I think it's so great that you were on, like, the Dead podcast and now that you're on the Changing Tides podcast, because I think it's, like, awesome that to know, like, how much, I mean, of course, there's so much credit to the businesses themselves, but, like, I wanted to learn more about what you were doing too. That was where
I did open by saying like, oh, I didn't have a business background. I just like telling stories, and so like it's not like I like prime myself for sounding like someone who is like a qualified expert. But you know, I think my education has come from getting to have these thoughtful interactions with business owners, and though they may not be able to qualify or quantify what they do that makes them so special, as someone who has like does have a background in I'm a skilled observer.
Oh, yeah.
And my job is to observe and then output that for other people to learn about, right? That's what journalism or good journalism is. And so I think that's the skill set I came in with. And then the business owners, thank God they trust me enough to share things. I can then learn from so many business owners and take a little piece here and there and then kind of come up with this kind of Frankenstein, like my idea of what a potential solution can be, but it's not my idea at all. It's everyone's collective ideas that I just happen to get to see all of them, right? Because I go into multiple business on a daily basis and most people don't. So when I present something, it's not really my idea or my thought or my brilliant solution. It's just my opportunity to interact with so many people and kind of like, okay, this piece of this work, piece of this, you know. I imagine it's kind of like chefs that work in so many different restaurants, and the reason they can come up with so many like amazing dishes and it's because of all these experiences they have, right? And then they bring their creativity into it or their personality, and then they create like amazing things. And I think that's something that like I appreciate about the opportunity for this job, is that behind the scenes or insider look with people that a lot of people don't actually know what they do every day, you know, or how much goes into, you know, actually running a small business. And I consider that a privilege, and I love it. And I want other people to like love the details of small business as much as I do, and appreciate that, because small business owners, they think about everything. They really do. Like everything. They worry about everything. They think about everything. It's like being like adjacent to them is like sort of being in their head, and you're just like, oh my God, that's a lot. Like they just care really deeply. And so yeah, I feel like it's a blessing. I'm really appreciative of it.
Because I think like the idea of pulling out or like being able to accentuate the skill sets of one business or the other of part of your work. Like I think of Cafe Dulce for one. Like I know like you've assisted in helping to donate the items at the end of the day that might not sell, right? It's like that might encourage, like just knowing that, like it helps me to kind of think like, oh, well, Cafe Dulce is a type of company I want to support then. Or Uprisers, like knowing the actual mission behind Uprisers, other than just like a cool name and a cool graphics, it's like knowing who's behind it and the causes that they support, or knowing more about Michelle. Like those types of things, I think are maybe you could help bring out of them if maybe Michelle might be too modest to do.
Oh, they're all too modest. Yeah. They all like hate that it's like brought out, and they feel embarrassed by it. But the other thing is, you need someone else. I mean, that's why large companies hire publicists, right? So they don't look like they're too braggadocious talking about the good things that they do, right? Small business owners don't do that, period. And I think it's important to know, because sometimes people don't know how to do better, right? And so you need to know these great examples of that in order to be like, oh, okay, that's how I can do better. That's how I can serve my community. Or, oh, that's a great idea. Maybe I can exercise that elsewhere. You know, we're sitting in a space that regularly has community events that sometimes barely break even, or they don't break even because they donate all the proceeds to someone else. But it's not convenient and it's not profitable. But those are the kinds of things that I think are why small businesses are so important, because they give back to their community. You know, I could do a bunch of numbers for you, but basically small businesses will give back almost the majority of all the money directly back to the community that they're in, right? Whereas a corporation will be like, it's like under 30% of the money that is spent at their store will actually go directly back into the community that they're based in. So if you go to Starbucks, like only 20 cents of your dollars actually can go directly back into Little Tokyo, and it'll probably go into third-party vendors. Maybe the employees spending their earnings will go and eat locally, whereas like Aze or Dulce or Suicidal, like their employees usually are based in the neighborhood, will spend money in the neighborhood. They all hire local vendors. They do a lot more in terms of the money that you spend at Aze will go directly back into the local economy that it wants to support. And if for no other reason, you should support your local business for that reason.
Yeah, 100%. So throughout your work in Little Tokyo, and you you are caring for your clients and you're caring for the community and so much more. How do you look inward to make sure like you're taking care of yourself? Like what are the resources that you utilize, whether it be therapy, as you mentioned, or getting out into the community? Like what is it that you do to make sure that you can take care of yourself before, so that you could take care of others?
I mean, I don't know if I take care of others as much as I facilitate opportunities for people to take care of each other. Like you mentioned, like Dulce, like all I knew was LTSC's Homeless Services Coordinator, one of the coordinators wanted to do this program. I knew that Dulce had, end of the day donuts that they didn't know what to do with. I knew both sides. They both trusted me. And I said, hey, let me just introduce you to each other and get this going, right? And so I'm just facilitating opportunities for people to take care of each other because, again, like most people, generally speaking, the majority of people, they wake up, they have a routine, they drive to one place or they stay at home, they talk to the same people over and over again, and then they go home. My day-to-day is not like that. And then the people I directly deal with, also their day-to-day is not like that. So you multiply that, and that's a lot of people to know and what they have. And it's like introducing people to each other and then be like, oh, you guys both have this. Like I always tell people my only superpower, if I have one, would be if you tell me what you need, I will find someone else will immediately tell me what they need or they want, and you guys will now know each other, and then we'll have the beginning of a solution, And I think that for me, knowing that my work, leads to me having a space that I can regularly go to and feel comfortable, like, is a big part of taking care of myself, which sounds selfish. So I'm like it's not altruistic at all. I just want to be able to come eat at the Zay. I want to be able to go to Dulce. Like these are my spaces that make me happy. Like on my off day even, when I'm not working. Like I like seeing their employees and chatting with my friends. So yes, I'm not altruistic at all. This is very selfish. Like, what would I do if Zay wasn't here? Like, I would be very upset. I wouldn't be able to come bother with Philip whenever I felt like chatting with him. Outside of that, I do play sports. I think doing sports where I have to be offline, so I play football, I do jiu-jitsu. Those are sports where I cannot be checking my phone, and basically I'm being beat up or run into the ground for like an hour to 2 hours. So that is something that's helped me a lot in the last few years. I never really was into sports growing up. Like I told you, I hated running. But these are two sports that have really caught my attention. And it might also be because of the level of stress my job has reached where it just became necessary. I got really big into sweat yoga. If not for any other reason, that I find myself moving lots and lots of boxes recently as part of my work. And just laying in a hot room is so relaxing when your body is in physical pain because you just lifted your 50th box in 5 days, because that's how a small business moves, is people power, not just me. It's usually a whole assembly line of everyone you grab off the street. Right. Literally grab off the street. I was de-installing lights out of Suicidal, and I was like, I can't reach. So I saw Philip outside. Philip, come help me. And I saw Yaki Poppies outside. You guys help too. Next thing you know, we got a team.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I mean, I need an electric drill. I'll go find one. You talk to the neighbors. I need a ladder. I'll talk to another neighbor, so I guess I'm very selfishly motivated to take care of my community because my community takes care of me.
So I understand that, but same way that you said some of these business owners are too modest, I think you're being a little too modest too.
Oh, yeah. That's a possibility. It's very hard to talk about yourself.
Yeah, and I won't make you dig into that, but I'm just wanting to let you know that I think you deserve your flowers too. So
thank you. Did Philip give me my flowers on his episode?
I didn't talk about you too much.
Oh.
Right. So you don't have to compliment Philip either.
Okay, good.
I'll
start talking about the business owner.
Okay. But because I wanted to ask you how you care for yourself before I want to talk more about some of the sadder stuff going on in Little Tokyo. But one of the first conversations around the businesses in Little Tokyo was me asking you about your work and how you define success and failure within your work. Because it's of course you could look at it as a success. It is a huge success that you were able to find, that Suihiro was able to find a new home and assisting them in any way that you could in that move. But how do you define those successes and failures within being a coordinator of small businesses or program coordinator of?
I think for me, I try not to use the word failure too much because I feel like that's a societal expectation that then we put upon ourselves. But for me, I think the biggest failure for me is when I meet someone who, for one reason or another, didn't feel like there was someone to reach out to for support, or to talk to, or they didn't know who to call or who to reach out to or what organization exists. For me, that's a failure. That's when your community failed you because everyone should know what numbers you call or who you reach out to or what, the small businesses program at Little Tokyo Service Center is funded through, government programs. It's free of charge. Anyone can receive assistance. And there's lots of programs like that across the country through workforce development programs. And so people should know, there are lots of services you can reach out to that are free of charge, that are meant to help you, whether it's through a nonprofit or a government agency or a grassroots organization. And I think for me, it's a failure when someone, for some reason, didn't know about them or didn't feel like it was for them. It was for someone else. And I don't want anyone to feel like that because everyone should always feel like there's a group, an organization, a community out there that is for them and that community is for everyone. And so gatekeeping for me is the biggest failure of any community or organization. Successes is, I guess, the opposite end of that is when someone feels supported, even if maybe they didn't successfully transition the business to new ownership, or maybe they were permanently closed, or maybe, they had to pivot their business idea in a way that was very far from the first thought, or maybe they had to close a business, start a new one, or get a full-time job. I think that as long as someone feels like they tried, that's a success. Mm-hmm. And I always want to honor people for trying. I always tell all my students, because I teach classes also, you're trying. That's more than most people do. Yeah. Most people just dream about doing something and they don't even bother to attend a community class to learn about how they could do it, much less even put it on Etsy or show up to a community event and try to sell their wares or walk up to a store and say, hey, would you sell this? I mean, I think trying is something that we should look at as a success, period. Because, like I said earlier, a lot of people don't care and a lot of people don't try.
Mm-hmm. With that, I talked to Philip about being one of the newer kids on the block of a small business in Little Tokyo and all the legacy businesses. And, we talked about passing of the torch, but, not necessarily passing the torch. We defined it as being involved in the process of the growth and the evolution of Little Tokyo. But I asked him about pressure, about shouldering pressure of what the future looks like. Yeah. When it comes to you and your work, about pressure or anything you feel the weight of when a business closes or ownership changes or it doesn't go according to plan, how do you prevent yourself from taking too much blame? Because, it's not all on you,
Yeah, I mean, I think where me and Philip differ is I deal with a high volume of many, many different businesses. Mm. So all of them are constantly at different stages of failure or success, depending on how you look at it on any given day. So since I have 50 timelines of all these different businesses, today maybe it's not going great for this business, but it's doing well for this business. And I think that helps me keep a realistic mindset about expectations, because I know it's always ebb and flow. Today's not going great for this person, but today's going great for this. One business model doesn't work well when it rains a lot, and another business, when it rains, they do really well. And you just realize that it's all kind of always going to be a constant up and down if you choose to look at it like that. I like to look at it as more opportunities to revisit ideas on the slow days, right, for a business, and then opportunities to realize where you can improve operations efficiency or consumer engagement on the fast days where you can't keep up with demand, maybe. So I think maybe if you'd asked me like 5 years ago when I first came to the neighborhood and I took everything very personally, then yeah, it was like harder. But now, like, I don't know. Maybe it's also like a little bit jaded, like to have so many people like pass away or businesses close. Like, if you feel everything, you're like going to be overwhelmed on a daily basis. So at some point, you have to just kind of like accept that this is just like, it's all a bit chauvinized sometimes. Like, it just can't be helped.
Yeah.
Some of the things that happen. So, yeah, I think that's one thing I always tell the businesses, like, it's not your fault. Like you're forcibly closed, or someone like broke your windows, or like your pipes burst, or the lights went out on the entire street. Or like these are out of our control, you know? I think the more you realize that things that negatively impact your business are mostly out of your control, then the more you can kind of be accepting of like, well, today didn't really go well. Tomorrow we'll try again.
Yeah. You know, the idea of grief has come up, our conversations prior to our talk today, and also in the talk. So this isn't a super pointed question, but when it comes to grief in Little Tokyo, you know, what is grief for you at the moment, like within the businesses or the people, the community? Like what does grief mean to you at the moment?
Yeah, I think right now what grief looks like, at least for Little Tokyo, is the loss of people's safe spaces. I think with Suihiro, I saw this, and Anzen, and you know, a dozen other businesses where these were people's like community spaces to meet with friends, to always have a good time, to feel comforted. Like when you hear the word comfort food, right? Suihiro is a perfect example of that, where the food really isn't that special. I mean, you probably shouldn't say that. It really isn't. I mean, it's like curry rice. It's like something you can make at home. But there's something there that's, you know, it's the memories, the nostalgia, the space, the energy, right? Like that is infused in the food. It's one of the reasons that people always say like, oh, I miss my mom's home cooking, right? Like you miss a certain meal that someone made for you because it was made with care or love or dedication. And I think that's kind of where I see grief. And also when it's a person, we know what we're supposed to do, right? We go to the funeral or the wake or the life celebration. But when a place or a space ceases to exist, there isn't necessarily a process in modern society for how we're supposed to process that grief, right? We're kind of learning it as we go. I think helping facilitate the opportunities for people to know that they're not alone in feeling that. Social media can be really great for this because everyone sees everyone else upset about a place, and they're like, okay, it's not just me, you know, it's not weird that I'm over here bawling my eyes out because like I can't go to Suihiro at 1 a.m. to get my favorite meal, you know, every month after like, you know, Tuesday night or something. And so I think that's kind of what I've been like kind of thinking a lot about is what is the process we're supposed to go through? And also, should it be the responsibility of the owner who's also in the middle of closing to create that opportunity for people to process it collectively? Because if it was like a family member that passes away, someone else in the family would take on the responsibility of the obituary and the funeral and the wake and those events, right? But when the business owner is also going through like maybe trying to figure out their next business or closing like it's a lot to take on, right? So yeah, I guess like grief is something I think a lot about when it comes to our community spaces that are living organisms in a lot of ways. I mean, they're collective memories, right? So I've been working really hard with the collaborators and Little Tokyo ambassadors from the community engagement program I get to work through with Little Tokyo Service Center to figure out how do we preserve those memories so it doesn't feel like everything got lost. Because when that Suihiro awning comes down, let me tell you, that's going to be weird.
Yeah. I feel like this next question sounds very simple, But I think there's a lot of different ways to do this, and how can people support Little Tokyo?
So I think one of the best ways that people could support Little Tokyo is to educate themselves, if they don't already know, why the community is important to a community you are not a part of. So if you're Japanese American, or you identify as Japanese American, and you know the whole history about the First Street Block, and that being the location where the buses came to pick people up, take them to the camps, and you've been to the museum a dozen times, learn about a different community that looks at Little Tokyo as their home. Because there are many groups of people, not just Japanese Americans, that are extremely passionate about this neighborhood. And it's interesting, like I learned a lot about the Pentecostal, how do I say that word? Pentecostals? Anyways, and like their history in the neighborhood and their pilgrimages. And it's so interesting, where there's like groups that are very interested in the history of Biddy Mason, and they have their own ties to the neighborhood. And it's Tongan land before anyone else was here. And I think it's great for us to learn about how other communities also value this land and this space for different reasons. Of course, it's always good, if you're not Japanese American, to learn about the Japanese American history here and why First Street Block is so important to a lot of Japanese Americans. But there's a lot of communities that value this space. And it's not just Japanese Americans or Americans of Japanese descent. It's an inclusive opportunity, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also even more broadly. It's of course it's like these big groups who see Little Tokyo as a second home. But I think anyone who just loves the culture or loves the food or whatever it might be, these individuals who venture in. I was telling Philip earlier, like I think the more of the history you know, the more you're going to be encouraged to venture out of the one restaurant that you fell in love with in Little Tokyo. You're going to be really encouraged to check out, the second floor of Bunkado, or this Mr. Ramen. Just because you fell in love with one restaurant doesn't mean there isn't a beautiful history, and create that core memory in another location. Because I think that knowing that history is so important.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
I do have some quick hitting questions, but is there anything else before I get to those?
No, I just want to say thank you to Philip Hirose for letting us use this space. We're sitting in Aze, which is one of my favorite restaurants. Strongly recommend their breakfast. So if you haven't been to Aze yet, you have to come here. If not for any other reason that they sponsor today's podcast.
And people, of course, the Little Tokyo, like the actual village, is wonderful. Mm-hmm. But there's so many great restaurants. Like for the people who just like maybe stop into Little Tokyo once a year, once every 6 months. Mm-hmm. There's so many great businesses like just outside the village that people need to check out. Like people don't even realize like Weller's Court is part of Little Tokyo too,
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of great places to try if they just venture out just outside of the village. There's like Aze is just right there.
Yeah, and there can be at least 2 more businesses opening up on this section of First Street South in the next 6 months that'll be locally owned, interesting. So there will be 3 businesses I strongly recommend on this one.
Cool. Quick questions for you.
Okay.
This is a tough one though. Is 3 people you invite to dinner, dead or alive?
It's so funny. I actually have an answer for this question because I often think about who do I want to meet most. And when I was in my 20s, I used to always say I wish I could meet my mom when she was my age, when I was in my 20s. Cool. Because, the mom when you're an adult or when you're a kid or growing up is really like, who was she before she had this whole family and this life? And you hear like little tidbits here and there and you're like, oh, man, my parents did some really cool stuff. Like, I want to meet that person, but you never will, right? Because they were a different person then. So I always say, like, I would love to have met my mom when she was in her 20s and who she was then and her personality and all that kind of stuff. The other person I would really love to have a conversation with someday is Roy Choi. I'm a big fan of a lot of his work. A lot of the things that I look at when I think about success and failure, especially in small business, actually come from an interview that was done with him when he was doing commentary around some coverage around his project down in South LA around Local. And I actually use it regularly as a reference material when I teach or I talk to small business owners, because I think he really has explored the definition of success and failure very, very well. And I've always wanted to like have a conversation and sit with him and like talk to him about that. And also like, where do we need to go next? And, you know, how do we try? So I know there's a good possibility he's connected to someone, so let's keep putting it out there and be like, really want to have dinner with Roy Choi or breakfast or coffee. I'm not going to be picky.
Is that 2 or is that 3?
I can't include myself. Is like dinner for 3?
I was thinking there'd be 3, not including you, but it could be just the 3 of you. That works.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean,
if you have a third person in mind, but I won't make you.
Yeah, I mean, I really, really, really am a huge X-Men fan, and I am obsessed with Stan Lee, and him and I have the same birthday. I'm still upset with myself that every time I had the opportunity to interview him when I worked as a journalist, I would freeze and pass it to someone else, because I would just it's the only time I've ever been fan-struck. And I covered a lot of red carpets in LA, and I did the Oscars, so I've like interviewed a lot of A-list celebrities, but Stan Lee would come around and I would just, and apparently he's like one of the nicest people ever and so easy to interview, and I just like, he gave me Storm, Wolverine, like my whole childhood, like, and I just can't handle it. So even like now, like I'm almost like emotional, I might start crying, like thinking about how much I love Stan Lee and how he gave me so much to like get through life, like alter egos. That's all him, you know, provided for me. So yeah,
that might be too much pressure then.
Yeah, but the problem is like I would want to, but I'm afraid the same thing would happen, and then I would ruin my opportunity to meet my mom in her 20s and Roy Choi. So I would be like, oh, Stan Lee, I still really want to hang out with you, but also like
it's a maybe.
Yeah,
it's a maybe.
I'd probably have to be sedated for that conversation. I'd just be like, near time, like hyperventilating.
My next question, Philip had to abstain because it's too close. But what is your, at the moment, if you needed a quick bite of Little Tokyo, what's your go-to at the moment?
Man. So I've recently been super obsessed with Mr. Ramen's cold noodle with beef and kimchi, and they do either miso sauce or ponzu. It's super good. It's not hiyashichuka, so it's not, it's not hiyashichuka, but it's like cold ramen noodles, and it's super refreshing, and I always get with beef and extra kimchi, and then I go back and forth between ponzu and miso depending on what flavor I'm feeling. Sometimes they give me both and I just split it half and half because I can't make any decisions. And that's been something I was really obsessed with up until when it started getting really cold like a month ago. And then recently, that's a good question. I started getting pretty obsessed with Curtis Ita's Kokono coffee on Saturdays. I had this amazing, like, he's doing like a persimmon something drink that's so yummy, and I love persimmon.
Persimmon coffee?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really good. I love persimmons. And then, you know, I don't even work with that business, but I love pasta e pasta. There's something about Japanese pasta that just like, it's weird because it's pasta, but it's like the thing that is like the most Japanese thing I could possibly eat in Little Tokyo, which no offense to all the other businesses, but it's like, for me, that's Tokyo cuisine. Like this idea of taking a food that's super famous in another country and then just like adding something like tarako to it. It's just like the most Japanese thing possible. Like some Japanese guy that's never been to Italy and probably never left his country became obsessed with pasta and watched all the cooking shows and did all the research and read all the cooking books in the bookstore near his house and then just became like obsessed with making delicious pasta but made it with Japanese ingredients. And so pasta e pasta is like a regular go-to for me. And I don't work with them at all. For me, growing up in Japan, especially Tokyo, like that is like Japanese cuisine to me more than any of the other traditional ones that people think of.
That's a really fun answer. I like that a lot. Because I tried one in Gardena recently called Spoon House, which is like I think it's a legacy business in Gardena. And like it was like a normal tomato sauce, but it was like a little sweeter than a normal Italian one. And then like the chopped hot dog in it. And it was just like so good, but it was like, I could never quite put my finger on what makes it so different from like a normal, not normal, but from an Italian pasta. But it was just like, it hit home. It was so good. And my last question for you is, how do you decompress after a long day? If I'll add a little modifier to it. If you just need to be like alone, like an alone time decompressor.
That's a good question. I mean, sometimes honestly I just lay on the floor and I stare at the ceiling. I love Law and Order. I don't know why. I don't know if it's that dum-dum or whatever it is. But that TV show is like, I think it's such like, you don't have to watch all the episodes. You can jump to any episode because they're not like episodic in terms of like connected. Like there are little storylines here and there, but really you can just jump into any one. They have a pretty clear format. I am a Trekkie, so like I love anything Star Trek, and I've seen all of the series like multiple times. And so since I know how everything ends, there's no stress when I watch these episodes because I heard once someone said that like, oh, people with anxiety like to watch the same TV shows over and over again because they know how it's going to end, so there's no surprises, and there's you don't feel like anxious or nervous about what's going to happen for a character. And I was like, oh, do I have anxiety, or do I just want something that feels like stable and consistent because the rest of my life is chaos and nothing can be predicted at all. So yeah, I think it's Law and Order or Star Trek I watch because I just you just know. I'll be like 10 minutes episode. I was like, that's not the perp. Nope, they're after the wrong person. We're 12 minutes in at the 17-minute mark. That's when the real suspect will show up.
That's so fun.
That's
how I am with the show Community. I just will watch it over. And I don't know if it's always anxiety. Sometimes it definitely is, but like sometimes it's just the comfort of knowing that plot line of what's going to happen next. A comfort show is always a good way to end the day. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else?
No, just adopt a local small business, support the people who support you. That's really it. Every time you're about to make a purchase, ask yourself, could this be purchased at a small business? Every time it won't happen, but like, start small. Maybe 10%, work your way to 20%. Because it is inconvenient. I'm so sorry, everyone. We can't I'm trying, but we really can't. And it would just not be a small business anymore.
I think an easy entry point for me was candles. Whenever I want a candle, I won't ever get one from like a Target. No matter, like I could get my toilet paper and everything else, but I'll wait until I go to a Bunkado or, that's usually my spot. I'll get Nostalgia on a candle usually. But I always will get a candle from a small business. I think if you find a little entry point like that, coffee beans, whatever it might be, like that's a really good starting point for small business.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I mean, honestly, coffee is a really good one because there's not actually a big price difference anymore between like a local coffee shop and a chain coffee shop. They're almost the same price at this point. Sometimes the local ones are actually cheaper. And the people are nicer, usually. They also let you use the bathroom. A lot of reasons to support your local coffee shops. But I think, find what the entry point is, start there, and just acknowledge the fact that like changing your habits is hard, but it does pay off in the long run. You also feel better about yourself.
Totally. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you at the next Uprisers, Suihiro, whatever it might be event. But Aze. Next time.
All right. Thanks so much. I enjoyed this.
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Mariko for joining me on the podcast to discuss Little Tokyo, discussing Uprisers, discussing Aze, Suihiro, all the different legacy businesses in Little Tokyo. And, also having a space for us to kind of grieve together to discuss how hard it is to lose some of these businesses in the area. And, we're still trying to fight to keep these businesses alive. But of course, whenever we lose any of them, it's really tough. And I think Mariko's work is super important, especially in a time like this. So if you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to our show for episodes that release every other Tuesday and give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. If you would like to support our podcast and help us grow, you can do so with a donation to the link at the bottom of the episode description. To hear more about Changing Tides, follow us on Instagram at LTSC_Changing Tides, or check out our website, thechangingtides.org. Let's continue to change the tide on mental health.